All right. Well, hey, good morning, Rise City. Good morning. Good morning. Looks like I'm going to give you a stock presentation, our investment talk, which maybe a little bit, but man, it's good to be back. It's been 4 weeks since I got to preach. In July, every summer, I take 4 weeks off from preaching just to relax, rejuvenate, study for what's coming up next. But man, in the last 4 weeks, have not Pete and Robert did an exceptional job just teaching, sharing. It's like I'm inspired, I'm moved. I'm like, I don't think we skip a beat when these guys preach. It's awesome. So super grateful to have them to fill in. And since I was last on stage, I got myself a little mustache now. So that's an upgrade, I guess. I don't know. My wife calls me Goose now. It's great. No, she doesn't. She does not call me that. And don't you call me that either. So one significant thing that did happened while I was kind of doing some vacation. We went to family camp at Forest Home, and Jamie and I had the privilege of baptizing my oldest son, Shepherd. Here's a picture on the screen. So I unbelievably grateful, love my children with all my heart, and so proud of them when they make these types of decisions. Last year, same place, got to baptize our oldest, Elise, and man, they got a lot of life ahead of them, right? But to know they are saying at this point, I want to follow and be devoted to Jesus. I'm just praying that God would, just keep watering those seeds that are planted. And it's such a joy as a parent to watch your kids say yes to wanting to follow God. So that was a big deal. That's way more significant than a mustache, I'll tell you that much. So this morning, we are going to kick off a brand new message series. And I want to lay over top of the series, actually, the last two lines of a famous American poem to kick us off. In 1915, Robert Frost wrote the poem, The Road Not Traveled. And the last two lines really are going to create for us, I think, are this decision point that we're going to need to make throughout the next few weeks as we go into this new series. And I want to read those last two lines, and it goes like this. You may have heard them in some form or fashion, but it says, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And so the poem's about a guy who kind of comes to this juncture and he can go one direction, and it's obvious that's the direction most people go because the grass is all worn down, and it's obvious people have traveled on that path frequently. But then there's another path that's far less traveled upon, and that's the one this person chooses to travel on. And when he looks back, he says that made all the difference. And today this new series is called Christocurrency. We're wanting to understand money from the mouth of Jesus. What did Jesus say about how we go about handling our money and our possessions? And there is a road that is traveled on very frequently in our culture that few of us travel upon. And we can choose to go that direction, and that's going to have its own set of outcomes. But there is a road that's less traveled on that I believe Jesus invites us to travel upon. And if we commit to it, there's a time I believe we'll look back and say, that made all the difference. It made all the difference to live in such a way that is a Christ-centered kingdom mindset versus our consumeristic, and I would even say materialistic and greedy, selfish mentality that plagues oftentimes our world here in the West. And I am asking, I know for some of you this is your first time, you're like, oh my gosh, what are the chances I come to a money series? And it's like, actually, it's the first time ever. I've never preached a sermon on money. I've preached a couple, our sermon series. I've preached a couple sermons, but not an entire series. And I think it's so important to do this because, first off, Jesus talks a lot about money. And if I ask you this question, I think I know your answer, but what if I asked you this simple question? Do you believe, especially for those of you who are followers of Christ, do you believe that we should live accordingly to what Jesus says that's recorded in the Bible? Do you believe that? Yes, two or three of you. Cool. So the rest, you're still trying to figure that out. But if you say you're a Christian, then I think you should say yes. Yes, like I think I'm supposed to live according to how Jesus calls me to live as written in the Bible. And he talks a lot about this. But a lot of us just don't want to have anything to do with it because it's so personal. It feels like you're getting in your business, which I'm going to in the next few weeks. But if I want to follow Jesus truly and authentically, then I need to pay attention to the things he talks about. And money and possessions are a big deal to him. So that's one of the things we're going to explore and why we're going to talk about it. A couple other reasons why we're doing this series is one, You're already thinking about money all the time because we're right in the middle of an inflationary cycle, and we're talking about this. We're feeling our pocketbooks getting pinched. Every time you fill up your gas tank and you get frustrated, right? You say that word under your breath. I didn't hear it, but I know you said it. Or you go to Costco and you're like, I don't know even what I bought, but I somehow had to pay him $300, And you're like, my card is half full and it still costs this much now. Anybody else have that phenomenon? Yeah, and you're talking about and thinking about money, and you watch the news and they just try to freak you out even more. So why wouldn't we talk about it and to ask, what does Jesus say and think about it? I also just believe wholeheartedly that there is a direct connection to your depth of relationship with God and your spiritual flourishing and your handling of what monies and possessions God entrusts you with. And the more you trust God with what he's entrusted to you, the more your spiritual life with him will flourish. And the less you do, the less you'll experience the depth and the riches of who God is. And the other reason I want to do this series, and it's probably more personal, but it's just because I personally have experienced just an unbelievable transformation in my own heart since I started traveling down the road less traveled almost 16 years ago. It's been almost 16 years. Jamie and I actually celebrated our 16th anniversary a couple days ago, so that was fun. And Jamie really was a huge catalyst for me taking a different road than I was traveling. And I'm so grateful we shifted the road that I was traveling and went on the road that she was traveling on, because it really has made all of the difference. And so I want to be very open and transparent in this series to share things, and I want to share things we've been through. There have been successes and failures, but I do think that one of the main reasons I see God's word being so true is because when I tangibly put in place what he's called me to in the realms of my personal money management, his promises are true. And I'm like, man, the Bible's real, God's real. I've seen so many things through it, and I want that to be your story as well. But when I started college, I was just like probably everybody else, and I got a credit card, and I didn't have to pay for anything up front. I could just get whatever I wanted. And then I got a car, and I had school loans and all that stuff. And so by the end of college, I was about $35,000 in debt, combining school, car, and credit card, not all credit card debt. And then I met Jamie, and Jamie came in with no debt. I was like, hey, honey, I got $35K to give you. And she's like, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And at that point, I had not had any intentionality or strategy towards giving. It was kind of very sporadic, I give some here, give some there. She had no debt, and she was very faithful to give consistently 10% or more. And so when we met and I came in with my situation, she came in with hers, there was a definitive moment that began to shift things. It was our actual first Christmas together, and I bought her a camera. My wife's a photographer, so she was like, oh, when you got me a camera? And it went exactly like I envisioned it would go. She thought I was amazing. Until she then all of a sudden had this moment, and she flipped, and she looked at me, and she goes, how'd you pay for this? I was like, well, I kind of didn't, but it's 0% finance, and we'll pay for it over time. And she looks at me, and she's like, you got to take it back. And I was insulted. That's my gift. That's my Christmas. You take my Christmas gift back? I'm taking it back. And after I got over my pride and we took it back, we began to have lots of conversations about what road are we going to travel on? And how can we actually get out of debt? And how can we actually pay attention to this mindset of Christocurrency and do what Jesus calls us to do with our money? And so we said right there immediately, it doesn't matter. We're going to figure out right now, we're going to start giving 10% of our income away right now. And we're going to start paying off my debt. And over the next 4.5 years, we paid off all $35,000 of debt. Now, the moment that was oh my gosh, my wife is amazing that she actually tolerated this, but one of the loans we had to pay off was I actually took a study abroad trip to China for 3 weeks when I was an undergrad, and I put on a loan for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And I only said yes to that trip because my girlfriend at the time was going. So when we got married, we used a little savings that I had and some money that we got from our wedding, and we paid on that loan. So my wife used wedding money to pay for a trip I went with my girlfriend on a couple years before. Yeah, that was a great conversation. But we began to say, we're going to pay this off. And once we paid it off, we said, now we're going to start trying to increase our giving. And can I tell you that I don't believe we would have been here in California able to plant and start a new church had we had that debt, because I would have looked at it and be like, we don't have the margin to make it out there in California. But God, once one thing was taken care of, opened up a new door, and we've now been here 10 years. And I don't share this to boast, but I'm just saying, like, this is our story. Like, we've been fortunate to be able to buy a home. We have no debt besides our mortgage, and we give 15 to 16% of our income away every year. And I'm telling you, it's because there was a definitive point of saying, I'm going to travel this road, and I can look back now and say it's made all the difference. It did not happen overnight. And throughout this series, I'll tell you just some moments that, like, man, it became hard and difficult and frustrating. But we can do this. And God is inviting us to travel that road less traveled and to see the difference it will make. And so what I want to start with this morning is I want to look at some words that Jesus spoke in his most famous sermon he ever preached that we know to be the Sermon on the Mount. And in this sermon, Jesus gives us 3 revealing tests to help us see just where lordship really lies. Who is our master currently? Is it really God, or is it perhaps money instead? And so today is really just me inviting us, and I've taken this test as well, and this, you'll see soon that this test is not something you just take one time. I encourage you to periodically evaluate because we always have the propensity to be pulled in the direction of the road that's traveled more frequently, that's paved in consumerism and materialism and all this other stuff. But Jesus gives us 3 tests to say who truly is your master. And so I'm inviting you to take kind of personal or family inventory. If you're married, to go home and to talk with your spouse and say, who is our master? I'm not at the end of this message asking you to raise hands like, whose master's money? And we're going to shame you. That's not what's happening. I just want you to wrestle with it. And then we'll talk over the next few weeks. Okay, so then what does God think about money? How can we manage it? And how can we be more faithful with it? But I'm walking through this with you. Jesus said these words in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. He said, no one can serve 2 masters. For you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Jesus says no one can serve 2 masters. Now, I need to tell you the Greek for the word no one, that phrase no one, is no one. He means that, like, it's impossible. Like, nobody can do this. You try to like split your focus and be devoted both to God and money. He said it's going to not lead you in good places because you're going to be devoted to one and despise the other. And I think many of us can understand that, right? When we try to have both God and money be God, like we say that's our devotion, we start recognizing, we actually start being more despising towards God, because when God calls us to be generous and to consider others, we're like, no. Like he's like encroaching on my personal space and my budget. Like, no. And you start despising God. And Jesus says that's the problem, like, because you got to focus and be devoted to one or the other. Don't try to do both. And he's inviting us to be devoted to God. And as we are, watch what God does to our heart to delight in the way he calls us to manage our resources. And so these 3 tests are found kind of in the surrounding context of where Jesus says you can't serve both God and money. And so I want to give us these 3 tests, and I ask you, please spend some time prayerfully, conversationally, evaluating. And commit to being here over the next month, because I think it's going to, I know it's a hard topic, and there's going to be some times it feels like I'm up in your business, but trust me, I'm up in my own business, and you can be in my business as well. Because I want us to experience spiritual flourishment. I want us to experience a richness that comes in knowing the Lord and trusting him at his word in this arena. And to take that road less traveled. So the 3 tests that we're going to see Jesus give are simply these: the treasure test, we've got then the vision test, and the worry test. The treasure test, followed by the vision test, and then we'll finish with the worry test. Let's start with the treasure test. And the treasure test ultimately is asking this question: what do my purchases reveal? In terms of just who are you ultimately serving? Who is your master? Is it God or is it money? What do your purchases reveal? Jesus says these words, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21. He says, "Do not store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store up treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." Very simply and very plainly, Jesus is saying, don't get caught up in the rat race and investing the majority of your resources in that which does not last past this life. Things that will eventually get old, things that eventually will rust, that you'll want an upgrade on, that you won't care about. Like if your primary source of investment are on earthly things, then you've kind of wasted it because you've probably heard this. There's no such thing really as a U-Haul behind a hearse. You ever seen that? Right? That'd be super weird if you pull up to a funeral and all of a sudden, Grandpa Jerry's, casket and he's got a U-Haul behind it with all his stuff. Like that didn't speak well for Grandpa Jerry. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, Jerry, like that stuff, like it's done. Like you can't take it with you. You can't. And so Jesus says, what are the things you can invest in that have lasting impact, that actually do matter? And when you consider that which is lasting, both this life and eternity, really the only major investment that lasts is that which you invest in people. And maybe all dogs go to heaven too, so I don't know, maybe you're pooch as well. But I'm vying for just people and their lives and how to help others in their life. Or are we going to use the primary amounts of what we have to continue to run the rat race, continue to get the latest, get the update, throw away stuff, buy more storage, all that kind of stuff, right? What actually lasts? And so Jesus says, here's the thing, like it's really easy. This treasure test is really easy. You really just need to do an audit of your finances. And in the digital world, that's easy. You just, go to your purchases like, where does your money go? And what do your purchases ultimately reveal? And the reason this is important is because Jesus says, because wherever your treasure is, your heart's going there as well. You can get a pretty good glimpse at what your heart is dedicated to and what you value most based upon your purchase history. Right? Whether it be entertainment, whether it be food, whether it be cars, whether it be whatever it is. Right? Like what do your purchases reveal in terms of your heart's devotion? And that's just straight data. You can just look at it. But Jesus realizes your money has this string attached to your heart. And if you tell your money to go in places that God says, this is what I call you to, your heart will go in that direction. But if it goes other places, it's going to go in that direction as well. Your heart's not neutral in this thing. And so the treasure test is really just asking, what do my purchases reveal? And so maybe this week is simply just do a personal financial audit or a family-based one with your spouse. What is given the greatest priority in your spending? And, perhaps it's also evaluating your debt. Like you're paying off a bunch of debt. Okay, so what did your debt reveal? Sometimes you have debt that you didn't even, it came your direction, maybe medically or things you're like, I couldn't foresee that. It really wasn't my fault. But a lot of debt is consumer-based debt, right? Which reveals your heart's treasure. And then just start saying, okay, here it is. And so if I classify these, what gets my priority? When I look at my own financial budget, I would tell you at this point in our life, our mortgage, go figure here in California, it wins, right? It's like boom. Number 2 is giving. Number 3 is saving. And the rest is what we live off of. And it's not like it's easy. I mean, definitely as costs keep rising, I'm like, I think I'm going to have to probably squeeze the savings piece and stuff like that. But our second largest is giving, next followed by savings, and then we live off the rest. And it's possible. And it's not because we're rich. It's just because over 16 years, we've continued to say, this is what's going to matter most. And we've watched what God has done in the midst of that. How about you? If you take the treasure test, what will it reveal? If you follow the trail of your purchases, perhaps your time, your energy, your affections, all that kind of stuff, who will it say is more your Lord? The Lord or perhaps money? The second test is the vision test. The vision test asks the question, what does my perspective reveal? Like my perspective in terms of how do I actually even see money and my possessions? What does my perspective reveal about what I believe about that money and those possessions? Jesus went from talking about moths and rust and thieves to now starting to talk about eyeballs. Jesus says this, Matthew 6, 22 and 23. He says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body will be filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light that you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. So what Jesus is talking about is eyes really are what give you vision and how you see things and how you see the world around you. And in the Jewish world, phrases like good eye or healthy eye, bad eye or unhealthy eye or evil eye talked about the lens you looked through and how you saw the world. So to say someone possessed a good eye or a healthy eye in that time meant that they saw the world through the lens of generosity and sharing. To say someone had an unhealthy eye, or to say that they have a bad eye, or some translations say an evil eye, was to look at the world through the lens of greed and stinginess and to be envious and covetous to other people's stuff. And so how do you see the world? Do you see the world through a lens in which you look to be generous and altruistic, or do you look to the world to somehow accumulate, hoard, and keep for yourself? What would your vision test reveal? Like if you were to put on glasses and to try to look in front of you and to see how do you see the world around you? If Jesus gave you prescription glasses, what would your prescription need? Would your eyes be unhealthy, or would he deem them to be healthy? Because many of us find ourselves succumbing to greed without even realizing it. It's kind of like a fish in water, right? It's just the environment. And our environment here in the Western world is one of greed. I mean, we might not like saying it like that, but it's true. We constantly are consuming, right? But I think oftentimes we don't like take personal recognition of whether or not we're greedy. We can see greed in other people, right? You can easily point out greedy people, can't you? Oh yeah, I mean I say greedy and you already can put some in your mind, but you're not in your mind, right? Very few people look in the mirror like, I'm just greedy. But there's a problem with that. Because I think that Jesus told us to beware of all forms of greed in Luke chapter 12. And the greed has a seductive aspect and even a kind of a subversive nature that you don't even see it, but it consumes you. And I think for Christians in particular, I think many Christians, we live with rose-colored glasses on in terms of our vision. We believe ourselves to be better than we really are in the realms of generosity and sharing. We can teach it to our kids. We can say the right answer. But stats would indicate, and in these situations, these are like firm statistics most of the time. They don't lie. And you may have heard this before, but Christians in the United States of America, on average, give away 2.5% of their money each year. 2.5%. That to me is more of an unhealthy bad eye versus a healthy good eye. But like we'll say, no, I'm generous. We do all like 2.5%. In a couple of weeks, we'll talk about like what is this whole thing of 10% and even beyond that. Like most people aren't even close to that. 2% is the average amount of money that non-Christians give away each year in this country. A 0.5% discrepancy? Because we're kind of like the fish in water. But we're called to look different. When Jesus in Luke chapter 12 talks about beware of various kinds of greed, he then gives this story or a parable talking about this farmer who gets this bountiful harvest. And it's more than he even has space to store it. His barns aren't big enough to actually put all of the yield in. And so he's in this dilemma. What do I do with all this extra that I got? And it never really even crosses his mind that maybe because I have extra and I can fill my barns up, then I can give away the rest of it, because maybe if I have a lot, maybe someone doesn't have as much and I can share. Instead, Jesus says he tears down his barns, builds bigger barns, and then he stores all the yield in the bigger barns, and then he gets a Cracker Barrel recliner, sits back, drinks whatever his favorite beverage is, and says, eat, drink, and be merry. And that's the American dream, right? Get as much as you can, store as much as you can, save as much as you can, and then retire and just whatever. But is it the kingdom dream? Is that based off American currency or Christocurrency? Because here's what's crazy. Here's what God says to this farmer who tears down barns and builds bigger barns, which is the story of many of our lives. He says, but God said to him, you fool. I can't soften that translation. He just says, you fool. You're going to die this very night. Then who will get everything that you work for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, and then not have a rich relationship with God. And he says, you got to be careful about the greed. And I think this is why Jesus himself said, if the light that you think you have is actually darkness, then how deep and the depth of that darkness that you're in. And I think many of us, we think we're living in light. Statistics would indicate otherwise. Our purchase history would indicate otherwise. Our debt bills would indicate otherwise. And God's like saying, no. I want you to have a healthy set of eyes and to be generous in your nature, because it reflects who I am in my nature. And so when it comes to the vision test, what is it? What are some things that we can do to evaluate that? And I think there's some questions that we can ask. Just to say, how do I perceive what God has given me and entrusted to me? Do I, or am I someone with what I'm given, whether it be my salary or possessions or whatever, do I give first, save second, and then live off the rest? Or do I flip that equation and I live off what I get, save if I can, and if I'm lucky, give something? Because if it's not your first, which we'll talk about that in a couple weeks, give first, save second, live off the rest, then we're probably building bigger barns. And oftentimes I hear people say I can't give because I don't have enough money to give. And most of the time you don't have enough money to give because you have so much discretionary spending on crap you don't need. And I'm not removed from that. I bought my fair share of crap too in the last 15 years. I'm just saying, right? We try to justify, but the truth is come on. Ask questions is your savings account loaded, but you're giving sparse? Do you throw caution and say things like, I got to pray about it when you're asked to give, but you don't throw any caution and pray about it ever when it comes to any of the things you want to buy for your own self or your family? Do you already have a ton of stuff, keep getting more stuff, and now you're figuring out how to get more storage? Right? The number one growing industry here in this country, you know what it is? Storage. Bigger barns. Do you label all your stuff? Right? When you go to work, do you put Susie on your stuff? I mean, as long as your name's Susie, that'd be weird if you didn't, if your name's not Susie. But you know what I mean? Do you label your stuff? That's my milk. That's mine. Or do you ever you know what? We can share. So we tell our kids at least, right? I mean, God forbid us tell our kids something, let's not live it out ourselves. Right? These are things that tell us, do I have a healthy good eye or is it stingy? If you get more, you get more. Is your immediate thought of what you can get for yourself, or do you ever consider when I get more, perhaps it's because someone else has less and I can share and be generous? Questions to wrestle with, but it's a vision test to ask, what do my perspectives about money reveal about, do I have a healthy good eye or not so much? Am I generous or more greedy in my approach to how I see things? Some of you are I'm not coming back to church until September. I'm pretty much done with this. Last test, and let me be really honest, this test is the one that is what inspired me to do this series because this is the test I failed. This is the test that I failed. And I told you, you need to take these tests periodically because there's times I'm like, yeah, God is God. He's the Lord. He's my master. No way, money. And there's other times like, oh, man, money crept in and it took over. The worry test. What does my panic reveal about who truly is my master? And in the last 6 months or more, probably last year, when I follow the trails of my worries, my stresses, anxieties, and what I panic about, gosh, it feels like that I just have not trusted God at all. And I feel like that my hands were like this, and they become more and more and more and more and more and more like this. And honestly, I feel that here at this church. I mean, God has unbelievably blessed this church and your generosity for almost 10 years now. And we've never went without. But then all of a sudden you've got like, just a huge exodus of people. And a lot of those people are very generous givers and they're gone. And all of a sudden you start seeing like the budget numbers shrink and you're like, you're like, oh gosh. And you're like, I got staff to pay and health insurance and bill, and the electric. And like, turn off the air conditioner. I start like getting crazy in the office, and you're just like, I just start worrying. And I didn't recognize that if I follow my worries and anxieties, they can lead me to show me who my master is. And money became more what I was starting to trust in and getting enough money or saving enough money versus trusting God. And so I failed this test. Let me show you the test that I failed. So this worry connection comes right at the heels or right after he talks about you can't serve two masters. So Matthew 6, 24, 25, it says, no one can serve two masters. You're going to hate one, love the other, devoted to one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and be a slave to money. He goes, therefore, this is why. That is why. So he's connecting what he's about to say to this notion of money and mastery. He says, that is why I tell you not to worry about your everyday life. And right now, as we're in this inflationary cycle, it's like we worry about this stuff all the time, right? Whether you have enough food and drink or enough clothes to wear, isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Like Jesus was saying, listen, why are you worrying if you're going to have enough? And I think probably these words were probably more pertinent and necessary back then because they really were struggling with like if they would actually have enough. We're not worried about as much if we have enough. We're just wanting more. And I'm not dismissing this, but because of the resources and the government funds and everything else and all the grants and aid, even those in the most destitute positions in this country have food and the opportunity for shelter and water and things like that and clothing. But yet we still worry because we don't know if we are not going to have enough or even more than enough. And so Jesus then says, here's the deal. Can I just, let me just give you a couple examples of why this worry should not be what drives you and still trust me as Lord of your life and as your finances more than you trying to take control of it. He says this, look at the birds. So he's like, look, I just picture Jesus outside. Like, look, you see them? Like, you see the little birds. Look at them. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to him than they are? Like they're just birds, but he still feeds them. They don't need bigger barns. Like they have what they need. And aren't you far more valuable to him than they are? Can all of your worries add a single moment to your life? What a powerful, disturbing question. You're like, what do I have to show for all my worries and stress? Nothing. I got nothing besides less years to my life, probably, and a lot more gray hair, right? He says, and why worry about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for the wildflowers that are here today and thrown in the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have such little faith? And here's the thing. when God says, why do you have such little faith? I don't believe he's saying, why do you have such little faith in terms of handling your finances? I think he's saying, why do you have such little faith in terms of how much I stink and love you? Because he says, I feed the birds, I clothe the lilies, and how much more valuable are you? I mean, just say those words. Say, how much more? How much more valuable are you? So why do you have such little faith to think that God loves you to such a less extent that he wouldn't provide for you what you need? Not necessarily always what you want. My dad always would say, is that a need or is that a want? I hate that question, but it's a good question. But he'll provide for you because he loves you, because you're his son, because you're his daughter. And so why do you and why do I have such little faith that God can't overcome inflationary cycles, that God can't deal with my gas bill being higher in a month or Costco going outrageous? He can. He can. Because he loves you like crazy. And it breaks God's heart that you and I don't trust him and we turn to money as our ultimate source of comfort, protection versus him. And he's just saying, how much more? How much more do I love you. Jacob, I love you. Ruth, I got your back. I love you. Jason, I got this. I love you. Rich, I love you like crazy. And don't you feel that at times with your own kids if you have kids in here? You want that, you don't ever want your kid to question the depth of your love. And there's those times you're telling them, trust me, I got you in this one. We're going to get through this. And so the worry test is saying, if you're panicking, you're freaking out, your stock's dropped a little bit or a lot, right? And some of you are like, yeah, a lot. It's not that God doesn't care. But he cares far more that you know he loves you so much and he'll bring you through this. So why do you have such little faith? And so in terms of the worry test, evaluate what preoccupies your mind, your emotions, your time, and is it in the realm of money? And if so, then maybe money is taking the seat of master over the Lord. Right? Is inflation and rising prices causing you to freak out? Are you committing to or remaining generous even when your pennies are pinched? To say, no, God is God. Right? Truly ask the Lord to show you your heart. And if you take that treasure test and the vision test and the worry test, he'll show you who the master is. But he's still inviting you. He's like, even if it's money right now, okay, then that's what the point of this thing is. Let's get the wrong entity off the throne and put the right one on there. Let's put Jesus where he belongs. And that's why he says these last words. Jesus says this in Matthew 6, 31, 33. He says, so don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers. That's a strong statement too. As followers of the Most High God and the provisionary King and Father that we serve, he says that unbelievers are the ones that are supposed to freak out because they don't, who are they looking to? But if you're freaking out and you're a believer, then what is your belief really in? Not minimizing, hear me this, not minimizing pinched pocketbooks right now and all that kind of stuff, but truly, he goes, these things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers. But your Heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Not once, but your needs. So seek the kingdom of God. Christocurrency, kingdom mindset, God's kingdom over your little castle. Seek the kingdom of God above all else. Live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So he simply just says, if those tests reveal that money's sitting on the throne, switch it up. Make the decision today. Seek first the kingdom. Say, God, I need to understand, and maybe over the next month, help me understand how you look at money and how you want me to handle this. I want to seek you first. And he says, then live righteously, which simply means don't just believe it. Right? I asked at the beginning, do you believe you're supposed to actually do what Jesus says to do according to the Bible? You're like, yep. Well, a couple of you did. But he says, so do it. Do it, live righteously, like actually apply it. And you'll see that you have everything you need. Or as Robert Frost said, you'll take the road less traveled and you'll look back and see that one made all the difference. For it's not Jesus, it's followers of him. If you're a follower of him, is he not worth the investment? And do you not trust, and do I not trust him to be good to his word? And those tests will say yes or no to whether we trust or not. I want to share a story with you from one of my friends here in the church. His name's Corey. And as you'll see, I said a lot of times people don't see themselves as greedy. But about a year and a half ago, Corey had a moment where the Lord revealed to him just the position of his heart. And he didn't necessarily know these 3 tests. We hadn't talked about it. But like, tests came back for him. And it was like, man, money's my master. But over the last year and a half, it's been incredible to see how God's shifted and changed his heart. And so I want to share Corey's story with you, because it can also be your story. I believe that. And then we're going to have just a few moments just to come together, sing a song about Jesus being our firm foundation as a declaration saying, please, God, please, I want to build my house and my financial future on your rock and nothing else. So take a look at Corey's story.